Hello guys, today I'm going to analyze four companies in the chip industry. The first company is Microchip Technology Incorporated, then there's Micron Technology, Qorvo, and finally Broadcomm. Let us first talk about their respective share price and their respective earnings. Microchip Technology bet its fourth quarterly earning and from last year, and they bet their first, second, and third quarterly earning from this year. And as you can see, the estimate for its fourth quarter this year is greater than the estimate for its last year's quarter. In terms of the share price, the company at the beginning of the pandemic started at 52 and it reached a peak of 87. Micron Technology bet its fourth quarter from last year, its first, and they bet their first, second, and third quarterly earnings from this year, and unfortunately the estimate for its fourth quarter is lower than the estimate for its last year's quarter. In terms of the share price, the company at the beginning of the pandemic started at 53, and it reached a peak of 93. Qorvo bet its fourth quarterly earning from last year. They bet their first, second, and third quarterly earning from this year, and as you can see, the estimate for its fourth quarter this year is lower than the estimate for its fourth quarter last year. In terms of the share price, the company at the beginning of the pandemic started off at 105 and it reached a peak of 195. Broadcomm bet its first, second, third, and fourth quarterly earning from this year, and as you can see, the first quarterly earning for next year is greater than the first quarterly earning for this year. Let us now talk about their respective financial statements. The first company I'd like to talk about is Microchip Technology, a company which produces circuits. Now, from their financial statements, we can see that the company experienced a rise in revenue from 5,274 million in 2020 to 6,820 million in 2022. The company accordingly experienced an increase in income from 570 million in 2020 to 1,285 million in 2022. Both of these things are very good to us as shareholders, and hopefully the company continues to increase their income. Now, the primary concern I have with this company is their long-term assets. The company has too many long-term assets. Too many of these assets do not produce revenue for the company, and as a result, a lot of capital is frozen. Income and long-term assets the ratio between income and long-term assets is not good, and the company should sell the long-term assets which no longer produce revenue. They should sell it, and as a consequence, and subsequently they should either retain the cash, increase their cash reserves and increase their stability, or they could use the cash from the sales to reduce long-term liabilities. Either way, the asset and income ratio is not good, and they do need to reduce their long-term assets. Second thing that needs to be asked is whether or not Microchip technology sells their circuits to the military, the US military. Nowadays, especially with the current war, chips will primarily be sold to the army. The military will be the main consumer, the primary consumer of chips. So it's important for these chip companies to have some sort of contact with the military. If microchip technologies do not have a connection with the military, then they might be on the last they might be the last receivers of chips, low priority consumers of chips. This would be very bad for the company because they would have delayed supplies of chips, and this could affect their production. In any case, let us now move on to Micron. Now, Micron experienced a rise in revenue from 21 billion in 2020 to 30 billion in 2022. Consequently, they experienced a rise in income from 2.7 billion to 8.687 billion. The next thing that needs to be mentioned is Micron's substantial investment activity. Micron is the first company to act upon the CHIPS and Science Act. It will invest $20 billion in the American market as a consequence of the CHIPS and Science Act the US Senate has passed. For those who don't know, the US Senate promised $280 billion. They promised that they will invest $280 billion into the chip market. The fact that Micron is taking advantage of this act is very good news, and it indicates that Micron's management is good. The fact that Micron is the first company to act upon this act is also positive news. It means that they will be the first company to benefit from it. Hopefully the American government also supports Micron in their sale. The last thing I want to say about their financial statement is their long-term assets. Here again, Micron has the same problem as Microchip Technologies. Their income and long-term asset ratio is not good. There are Micron has too many long-term assets which do not generate revenue, and it would be nice to see a decrease in long-term assets. That being said, these long-term assets, these substantial long-term assets could be related to the investment I previously mentioned. If that's the case, then Micron can't sell it. Hopefully, we'll see an increase in revenue thanks to these long-term assets in the future. And maybe some of these assets are being subsidized by the US government. But if that's not the case, if some of these long-term assets are redundant, then it would be nice to see Micron sell them in the future. The last thing I want to say is again about the military. Micron produces motherboards, it does not produce chips. So again, it has to rely on someone else for their chips. If Micron provides their motherboards to the US military, then they're a high priority. They will receive their chips earlier than other companies. And that would be very good news to us as investors. That being said, it's possible that Micron does not have a relationship with the US military. And if that's the case, they might be a low priority target. They might have delayed shipments of chips, and this could reduce their production. Hopefully that's not the case. Now, let us move on to Qorvo. Now, Qorvo experienced a rise in revenue from 3,239 million in 2020 to 4,645 million in 2022. They also experienced a rise in income from 334 million to 1 billion in 2022. Now here again, Qorvo does not produce their own chips. They produce wireless equipment and rely on another company for chips. That being said, Qorvo does work with the US Army. They have worked with Lockheed Company in the past and they're still working with them, so they are a high priority target. They will receive chips earlier than other companies, and that is very good news to us as investors. Now, new technology is needed, new military technology is needed, so we can expect an increase in sales for Qorvo and therefore an increase in income. At least for the short term, a short-term increase. Whether the company continues to increase revenue in the long term is still up to debate. They will definitely experience an increase in revenue and income in the short term. Moving on, let us now talk about Broadcomm. Now, Broadcomm has experienced a rise in revenue from 22 billion to 27 billion in 2021. They experienced a rise in income from 2,700,000,000 to 6,736,000,000 in 2021. Broadcom has the same problem as Micron and Microchip technology. Their long-term assets are too large compared to their income. They did reduce their long-term assets from 64 billion to 58 billion in 2021, but I'd like to see a further decrease in long-term assets. Now, Broadcom designs, develops and manufactures semiconductors and infrastructure software products. So they're independent of other chip companies. They have had problems in the past. For example, they had to face an antitrust complaint in 2021 in the US. And now they have to face an antitrust complaint in Europe. This could lead to a loss in revenue, although it's likely that if the complaint leads to a loss in revenue, the company will lose a small amount of their revenue. It's unlikely that they'll lose a substantial portion of their revenue. And it's, again, this antitrust complaint is being held by the European Supreme Court. There's only one European Supreme Court, so it's unlikely that they will face any other antitrust complaints in the future. Now let us rate all four of the companies. I'm going to place Micron in the buy section. The company's income and revenue is good. They do need to improve their equity and income ratio. However, it's not terrible. And they clearly are under good management. They're trying to improve their company, take a larger portion of the market. And it's highly likely that they will profit from their $20 billion investment. Now, Microchip is going to be placed in the OK section. Here again, we have to ask whether the company is high priority or low priority. What connections do they have with the US military? The company needs to improve their income to equity ratio. Micron has income to equity ratio problems. However, they are not as bad as Microchip's. Qorvo is going to be placed in the buy section. The company has connections with the US military. They have worked with well-known military companies such as Lockheed Martin. Therefore, they are a high priority company, and it's likely that they will receive chips earlier than other companies. They will profit in the short term. They will increase their revenue and income in the short term. The only question is whether they will maintain their profitability in the long term. Broadcomm is going to be placed in the buy section as well. The company's financial statement is very good. Their income revenue is very good. Equity, long-term asset and income ratio is good as well. It could be better, but if at the current stage it's alright. And I don't think that the antitrust complaints will have a significant impact on the company. In any case, that is all I have to say about all 4 of these companies. And in the next video, I'll talk about Fastenal, Johnson's Controls, Masco, and Train Technologies. If you enjoyed this video, give it a like and subscribe, and see you next time.